Well, the Eagles back at OTAs today. Eagles head coach Doug Peterson speaking to the public, to the media today. And, some interesting things came up. Let's bring in football at 4, John McMullen, as we talk NFL football and Eagles every day at 4 o'clock right now on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Johnny Mac, what's going on, my man?
How are you guys?
We are experiencing some nice wind down here. It's a beautiful day in Cape May.
I've been there.
Yeah, man. But up in Philly, where it's probably not as windy, those guys are out there practicing, getting ready for the season, and some other things. Doug Peterson talking today, and let's start with Miles Sanders. He was back at practice, or he was going to be. You asked the question. You said, "Is Miles Sanders back at practice today?" What did we find out about him today for the rookie running back?
He was not back, and there was a report from Adam Schefter, I believe, that Miles was going to be back at practice last week. Didn't turn out to be the case. Is not back at OTAs this week, and we got 3 more left, and we'll see if he can get on the field. Certainly sounded, by the way, Doug talked about, though, was talking about caution and no need to have him out there at this point of the year. So I would doubt if you're going to see him this week in OTAs, and then next week is minicamp. Hopefully he can get on the field for some of that, and then you have the one lull in the NFL season between minicamp and training camp. But it's pretty clear, and that's the way you should go about things. Anytime a player has any type of injury this time of year, you should err on the side of caution. But it is a little bit more concerning for a rookie because they need this work more than veterans who already know the system and know the setup and know the landscape.
Yeah, now, when you have that position, that particular position where you're hoping that, I think the Eagles are hoping that he contributes, how does missing this time affect his opportunity or how much he can give to this team? Not a lot, or do you say, yeah, you know what, missing some of this may scale back what he can give to this team?
Well, it could scale back at least early in the season. I think that's fair. I think the later you start as a younger player, the more issue it becomes about learning the offense, about getting sort of entrenched. Obviously, they hope he can garner a role. And I think if everything played out the way they would like, he would be the complementary back to Jordan Howard. The longer he's out, if he doesn't make it back for minicamp, I think then he's sort of behind the 8 ball, at least to start. And you don't have to look far. Josh Adams last year was limited in off-season work. And you remember by the second half of the season, he had a significant role, but it took a while to ramp up. You're also talking about different phases. I mean, Josh was an undrafted free agent. Miles is a second-round pick. So the pedigree is much different, and Miles will get plenty of opportunities, but it would be better than not if he didn't have a hamstring issue, and he does. But you got to make the best of it, and that's why they're being cautious.
John, you wrote an article on 97.3 ESPN.com regarding Malcolm Jenkins, titled "Peterson Expects Malcolm Jenkins at Minicamp," and this has been an ongoing story where what's going on with Jenkins, is he going to hold out? It seems like all is well. He's going to show up once it becomes mandatory. But my question to you is, do the Eagles have a tough decision on their hands coming up in the future? He's coming down to, the end of his deal. He's 31 years old. This is where teams make these tough decisions. Do you re-sign a huge locker room guy, a great player on and off the field, or do they need to get a little bit savvy and figure out a way to replace him down the road and go younger?
Well, I think that's pretty much the NFL in a nutshell, is the constant turnover, and you have to be sort of a step ahead of it at all times. It goes south quickly. We've seen it with players in the past. Malcolm plays a lot. He plays basically every play of every season. He doesn't miss practices. So this is a guy with a lot of tread off the tires, so to speak, at 31. That said, I say it all the time. He's not the best player on the Eagles defense. That's Fletcher Cox, but he's the most important player. And the Eagles know that, and he's still playing at a high level. He's still a Pro Bowl level player. He's still got 2 years left on his deal. The problem is, as everything happens in the NFL, contracts are about timing and circumstance, and there are lesser players that have come up for deals that now get paid more than Malcolm. And you don't have much leverage as a player. One of the few leverage points you do have is to stay away from voluntary work. He's doing that. And by the way, I don't necessarily expect him in. The Eagles expect him in. Doug is the head coach, and he clarified, look, it's mandatory. I expect all players to be there. And that's what he meant. Malcolm would be fined $80,000, which is not significant for missing minicamp. And if you rework something out, say in the summer, you could always waive those fines. So I'm not sure he's going to be in next week. But I am sure something's going to get done because he's too important for this Eagles team, and they understand that.
Is it going to take him to sit out more once it does become mandatory for them to get something done here quickly, or do you anticipate that happening sooner than later? How much longer can this drag on?
I think it'll drag till training camp, and I think at that point, a similar thing happened to Brandon Graham a couple of years ago. When he outperformed his deal, Vinny Curry was still here. Vinny Curry was getting paid more, and the Eagles tweaked his deal as far as allowing him with incentives that could make more money. In Malcolm's case, I think you have some wiggle room, not only with incentives, and they could be easily attained. I just said that, Malcolm plays every down. So if you tie them to, say, playing time, they're easily attained. And the second part is guaranteed money. When he signed his extension, almost all of the guaranteed money from that extension is gone. So essentially, I think the Eagles are going to guarantee the final 2 years of his deal, put some incentives on there, and I expect that to happen over the summer.
We're talking with John McMullen, Football at 4, at JF McMullen on Twitter. 2 weeks of Carson Wentz, and Doug Peterson said something today that I thought stood out anyway. He said, we're starting to see, that he looks similar to the guy that they saw 2 years ago. And for Doug to kind of come out and say that, it's almost like him acknowledging the guy we had last year maybe wasn't the guy that we had, that we all had hoped. But he certainly looks a lot like that guy we saw 2 years ago. So that's kind of a telling, I thought anyway, John, a telling statement from Doug Peterson, acknowledging that his guy looks closer to the guy that, we all remember 2 years ago.
Well, yeah, and I think part of it is the common sense aspect of coming off the torn ACL and the LCL. And we said numerous times how long that takes, and you generally don't feel like yourself until the second year. So that's part of it. And then the second aspect is the evolving, and that's the Eagles' term, back injury. So Carson played quite a bit of time with a bad back. I think it showed up on the injury report week 7. So if you think about it, he missed the first 2 games. He only played about a month where he was healthy, and he was still coming back from the knee injury, but healthy from a doctor's standpoint, being cleared. And then he was all of a sudden dealing with the back. So it was a difficult season for him from a health standpoint. And yeah, I mean, he's feeling good. He's back from both. And the key is getting through the season healthy. And I think you've already seen what Carson Wentz can do when he's healthy, and that's being an MVP level quarterback in this league.
Yeah, John, another thing is he mentioned today, he was asked about which players have kind of stood out, kind of a vague and general question, but from that you got to see what he's thinking. And one of the guys he brought up is a guy that you've brought up a lot and questioned how they're going to, use him and work him in, and that was Dallas Goedert. He mentioned them as, in fact, I think it was the first guy that he talked about when asked about, hey, who has really kind of stood out in this time frame? Well, you know who's had a good one? Well, he said Nelson first, and then he said Dallas Goedert has really improved. So let me get a sense from you if you feel any differently about how do they work a guy and this weapon into the mix?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because of the two names he mentioned, and you said him, Nelson and Dallas. And generally, when one's on the field, one isn't. So they're both playing at a high level, and the Eagles expect big things out of both, and they're both good football players. You know, I do see already some more sort of flexing of Zach Ertz, who's in a lot of ways even more of a glorified receiver, at least in the spring, and that's to take advantage of Dallas Goedert in line because he's a better blocker, and he really surprised the Eagles about being able to do that. So I think you're going to have this package where Dallas plays in line and Zach is essentially a wide receiver, a slot receiver, and that's how they'll get him on the field. But we've talked about the riches at the skill positions for this team, and I do think it's a nice problem to have, but I do think it can be a problem. And there's a lot of guys who are used to getting the football, and there's only one football. So I think that might be one of the most interesting stories about how this offense develops.
John, speaking of the offense and how it develops, you know, Mike just mentioned him, Nelson Aguilar, he has a lot of questions surrounding him. You know, Doug comes out today and says he's looked great. He's one of the guys that has stood out to me so far. So, I mean, what does that mean? Could that change what they do? Are they trying to sell his worth and value to another team? Or, you know, how does he fit moving forward? And are the Eagles going to try and make him fit?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because of his contract. We've talked about it a lot. He's on the final year of his rookie deal, and he's a first-round pick, so that's a fifth-year option, and that means a big spike in salary, and he's a big number for a slot receiver. So you have that part of it. You have the part that, in theory, you would like to work out an extension. You have it from Nelson's standpoint that I just talked about all the people that need the football, and, you know, him being on a contract year, it's probably not going to get the type of traffic that can generate a big money contract. You got to put up numbers to make a lot of money in this league. So I do think there's some questions that have to be answered. What doesn't have to be answered is Doug Peterson loves Nelson Aguilar as a player, and he's a big part of his offense. So the other questions are for Howie Roseman and how you want to cobble together this 53-man roster, not only this year, but next year and the year after that. And he's still got work to do. The most notable piece of work he has to do is with Carson Wentz, obviously, with his extension. But if the Eagles want Nelson here, and Doug certainly would be in that camp, then it would be probably a better way to go to work out an extension for him as well and lower that salary cap number. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered with Nelson, not only on the field but off the field.
Yeah, and I know we're just in the mini camps, OTAs, mini camps, so a lot of these answers are hard to definitively get. However, people love their football, and they love to get these little storylines. And another one is, on the defensive side of the ball, I know that one of the things people keep asking me, John, is the secondary. We talk a lot about the secondary on this show, Football at 4, but he went out of his way again today. He said Avonte Maddox is picked off where he left off. He's looking really good. Sidney Jones is playing with the absence of Jalen and Darby right now, so it almost suggested that he thinks Sidney is a backup to those two guys. I don't know if that was a tell or a tip or something there, but he did mention Avonte, Sidney, Jalen, Darby, and even Russell Douglas. So it sounds like Doug Peterson is cognizant and aware that he has a very intriguing battle in that secondary. But was that a tip of the hand a little bit that he thinks Sidney Jones is behind Jalen and Darby?
Yeah, I mean, and I've said it a lot, he is. That's how the Eagles do business. And when training camp begins, if Jalen Mills is ready to go, if Ronald Darby's ready to go, they're the starters. They will start as the starters. And then on the outside, then you have Sidney Jones that would push Jalen Mills on the left side, Rasul Douglas pushing Ronald Darby on the right side. Avonte Maddox is the starter in the slot, and then Cre'Von LeBlanc is behind him. So, yeah, I mean, that's how the Eagles do business. But I will also say that they would love Sidney Jones to win the starting left corner job for a couple reasons. One, he's got a tremendous amount of talent. Was going to be a first-round pick till he got hurt. At his pro day, we all know the story. And Jalen Mills is on the final year of his deal. He's a good player, not a great player. You probably don't want to spend a lot of money to bring him back. So you want, from that standpoint, Sidney Jones to seize that job. But he's not going to be handed. Jim Sports likes Jalen Mills as a player, likes what he offers, especially from a physical standpoint. And he said that Sidney needs to get stronger and needs to hold up better in run support. So that's where he is. Yes, right now he's a starter in off-season work, but only because Jalen Mills is not able to go yet. And when Jalen is, he'll have to beat him out.
You know, John, there's a lot of talk, as always, about the secondary and who fits, who's going to start, who's going to win a job, who's going to be here, who could get traded, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems like you almost need the depth at that position. I mean, it's the NFL. You could use the depth, you know, at any level, at any position. But especially in the secondary, it seems like for the Eagles, it's really benefited them over the past couple of years to have a Rasul Douglas who can step in and make a big play, make a big interception. And, you know, maybe they need to keep all these guys. Like, how do you see this secondary playing out, and how would you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the modern NFL. It's a lot different. I'm keeping 6 corners. I think the Eagles are keeping 6 corners. It's pretty evident who those 6 will be, barring injury. And that's Mills, Darby, Jones, Douglas, Maddox, LeBlanc. So those are the 6 guys. But all you have to do is look back to last year. I mean, Jalen gets hurt.
Yeah.
Ronald gets hurt. And all of a sudden, you have issues at safety as well with Rodney McLeod and then Corey Graham going out for a while. Avante's a rookie, still learning. He's got to move back there. Then he's got to move back to the nickel. Then he's got to move to the outside. Then they got to pick up LeBlanc off the street and coach him up. So you need that depth at that position. The Eagles understand that. They know that. Josh Hawkins is another guy on this roster. Nobody talks about that much, but he was playing significant snaps last year because of the injury issues. So you can never have enough good corners in this league. The Eagles know that. And, yeah, they're going to keep all 6 of those guys, and they should. And that's just sort of what the modern NFL is. And this is the first time, I'll give you an example. For whatever reason, this league would always pay deference to sort of the old school starting lineups. For the Eagles in the 4-3, it would be 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers. You would start practice that way. No more. They just start in the nickel with the 2 linebackers. And Avonte is the starter in the slot. It's changed, and it's changed drastically, and you need more defensive backs. You need more bodies, and the Eagles understand that.
What is a better chance of happening? Those 6 corners are on the team, or one of them gets traded?
6 on the team. They're not. And the only way they would trade someone is if someone like Josh Hawkins or Jeremiah McKinnon, they'd be the 2 corners behind those 6, play so well in training camp. They feel so good about a younger player like that they could get an asset for a more proven corner. But they're not trading. It's got to be one of those guys. They're going to keep 6 corners. And unless one of those guys can stick their head out of the pack, they're going to go with the 6 proven guys.
Is Andre Iguodala a Hall of Famer?
It's interesting. He's close. He's very close. And I think the difference is people don't understand the pro basketball Hall of Fame is a little different than the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And it's not the NFL Hall of Fame, it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But they generally only take into account NFL numbers. For instance, Warren Moon, nobody cares about his CFL numbers, but in basketball, they take into account the Olympics and things like that. And the fact that he's not only won NBA titles, all defensive, one of the great defensive players of this generation, but has also had so much success in international ball, he's close. Ultimately, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I think he just misses at this stage. But I would not argue if he goes in. And, Mike, when he was here, I would scream and scream and scream about how good a player he was. And let's be honest, some smart fans understood that, but there are a lot of fans who didn't because he wasn't a great offensive player. He wasn't scoring 30 a game.
I think most of it was his pay says that he's supposed to be better than he was.
He was just one of the better, more well-rounded players in the league. Could do everything, and I think now that he's gone, people realize that.
Yeah, whose career would you rather have, Barkley or Iguodala?
Well, I mean, you would always want to win a championship. I mean, Charles is one of the great players of all time. You can't compare him as players. Charles was sort of blocked by the Michael Jordan era. I would personally, that's one of the best 5 power forwards of all time. I would want to be that good, but boy, you want that ring.
Well, John McMullen, who, by the way, longtime NBA, covered the NBA for a long time there. And, of course, now football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Eagles back at OTAs tomorrow and Wednesday. And then they have the mini camp in the following week, and then that's it for a little while there. But the football will continue here on the Sports Bash. Johnny Mac, always a pleasure, pal.
All right, thank you, guys. Enjoy the win.